Welcome to this week's transport vlog. Now let's talk about the international dimension of transport this week. And which are the two most international modes of transport? It's aviation and it's shipping. Now, when it comes to the European Union, everything that happens within the European Union's borders are, to an extent, regulated and can be regulated by the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the member states of the European Union. When you bring in the external world, things get a lot more complex, and this is what we're going to talk about today. Aviation and shipping obviously involves planes coming into the European Union, going out of the European Union to other countries, and of course shipping, where a lot of global trade happens, involves the same thing. Huge container ships coming into the Union waters, going out, and all stops in between. Now, the European Union doesn't regulate both of these sectors exclusively. You have two UN agencies for that. You have the International Maritime Organization, which obviously is all about shipping, and you have the International Commercial Aviation Organization, ICAO. And the conflict between these two agencies and the European Union is something that is infinitely interesting. And last week we got a taste of that because the IMO's Environment Committee, as you want to call it, was basically debating how to make sure that the shipping sector's environmental footprint comes down in line with our international climate targets under the Paris Agreement. And basically it was a wet blanket where IMO states agreed to carbon intensity targets rather than carbon reduction targets that people wanted instead, which will lead to about a 1% decrease in carbon emissions over the next decade. Considering the fact that carbon emissions are predicted to increase by 15% by 2030, that means that they've agreed to only increase them by 14%. And herein you see the problem. If we just switch to aviation for a moment, there is a similar little bit of conflict between what environmental campaigners and greener-minded countries want compared to what ICAO has agreed to, which is called the, I won't go into the full jargon name because we haven't got time for that, CORSIA, which is this system under which all carbon emission increase after this year is negated by offsetting it by buying sort of offset permits, investing in renewable energy, investing in reforestation schemes, this kind of thing. So any aviation growth is brought back down to the level it currently is. A lot of people have a lot of problems with that because it's like me saying, I'm going to shoot you in the leg, but it's okay because I can take the bullet out and sew up the wound and it'll be fine. Whereas, of course, the best option is to probably not shoot someone in the first place. And the European Union has signed up to CORSIA wholeheartedly, is currently looking at how to incorporate it into the bloc's carbon market, the emissions trading scheme. Next year, it should reveal how it actually wants those two things to slot together. And despite a few crinkles along the way, the EU is more than happy to let ICAO be the lead in aviation. Next year, there's going to be a lot of aviation-minded things coming out of the EU. That includes reviewing the ETS and maybe reducing or phasing out completely the number of free pollution permits that aviation gets. But let's not forget that we're living in coronavirus times, and the aviation industry, for all of its pluses and minuses, is very hard hit by this. Air travel demand has gone down below 90% of what it was last year. Jobs are on the line, GDP is on the line. The idea of aviation being hit with a hard stick at the moment is not very palatable to a lot of governments. So we're going to look at a situation where the EU is going to be more than happy to let ICAO be the one that regulates everything because CORSIA is going to work, it's going to bring emissions down, and so on. When it comes to maritime, though, even though shipping has been hit by the coronavirus crisis, it has not had the same visible fall from grace that aviation has. So the idea of making shipping pay its way more is not totally anathema to a lot of regulators and governments at the moment. And the fact that the IMO has ostensibly failed over the course of the last few weeks to set some sort of realistic carbon reducing pathway for the sector means that the European Union probably has a lot of political capital, goodwill, and opportunity now to basically say to the IMO, well, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's time for us to take over. And that course has already been charted because earlier this year, the European Parliament, under the guidance of Green MEP Jutta Paulus, basically agreed to include the maritime sector in the emissions trading scheme, which it hasn't been so far, completely excluded. Those negotiations are still pending. The last thing I heard, nobody's going to be meeting about this year. That could change. The Commission next year, as I said, will propose this upgrade to the ETS. Part of that is likely now to be, how do we include shipping into this? Do we just roll it in completely? Do we set up its own dedicated little sector? Who knows? So you've got these two things right now. Aviation, the EU is likely not going to extend beyond its mandate or, ruffle feathers elsewhere, piss off Joe Biden within his first few months by including all aviation within the ETS. It's probably not going to happen. When it comes to maritime, though, there is a big opportunity here for the EU to say, look, you have proposed this heavy fuel oil ban in the Arctic that basically isn't a ban at all. If you listen to a lot of analysts, this emissions reduction pathway isn't going to work. We are trying to update our 2030 target here in the EU to something far more ambitious. This is simply not creating the level playing field that we need to sell this to everybody. How do we tell energy producers to make even bigger decarbonization steps when shippers are basically being let off scot-free? So two separate fortunes for you to look out for going into next year. Don't expect too much to happen in aviation externally. A lot will happen internally in the EU. But when it comes to shipping, that is where there are some rough seas ahead. There we go. There's the pun. Thank you for tuning in. And I'll probably see you next week for another transport vlog. Subscribe, send the newsletter to all your friends, rewatch, watch it again. And until next time, go away. Ciao.